Second that, Mr. Mayor.
Additions or all in favor? Adoption of the minutes from the February 1st, 2019.
Made that move. Oop.
Go ahead.
Motion.
I'll second.
Okay, Councilor Willis, second Councilor Gould. Any errors or omissions? All in favor? Great, thank you. Petitions and delegations. We have BC Assessment, Tracy Wall, Deputy Assessor for the Thompson Okanagan Region will provide an overview of property assessments and 2021 assessment roll. Tracy, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. And James, do you have a copy of my presentation or should I try and share it?
Please try and share it.
Okay, let's see what I've got here.
Or I can find it.
Sure, I've got it up, I just not sure how to share.
Hang on 1 second.
Oh, I think I'm almost there. Let me know if you can see it. There. Can everyone see it? Okay, we're ready. We're in business now. So I'll just start it from the beginning. So I just want to thank Mayor and Council for inviting me this evening. It's always a pleasure to come and tell everyone about BC Assessment, the work we do, as well as what's going on in your communities in terms of the values and the assessments, which I'm planning to share with you this evening. So just a little bit about, or let's have a look here. Make sure I'm moving them.
I might still have control of it, so I'll do it.
Oh, okay. If you can switch to the next slide. Or do I have to share again, I wonder?
We can see what James has up, but not what she has.
Try that.
Uh,
There we go. All right. Now we're in
Okay.
business.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so can you see the second slide where it says the topics that I'll be speaking of this evening?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I will talk about BC Assessment, obviously, how we value property, how we classify property, our assessment cycle, some of the key dates that affect assessments, what the relationship is between assessments and property taxes. And then I'll provide you with an overview of what's happened on the 2021 assessment roll in Princeton, a little bit about the appeal process and how many appeals we've got for your community this year, and then how we share information, how you share information with us and we do with you. So who we are and what we do. So we were established back in 1974 under the Assessment Authority Act. We're a Crown corporation. And we're independent of all taxing authorities and government. Previous to 1974, many of the municipalities had both a taxation department and an assessment department, so there was a perception of a conflict of interest, and that was part of the reason why we came into being. We provide uniform and fair assessments for all of BC property owners. Back in 1975, there were under 1 million folios, and now we have over 2.1 million properties that we currently are assessing. What we produce is called our assessment roll, and it provides a list of ownership, values, classification, and if there's exemptions applied to a property, we'll report that out. Our role is worth over $2 trillion province-wide, and we provide, or we help support communities that raise over $8 billion annually for property taxes. How we value different properties. Well, one of our key dates is July the 1st. So we're looking at market value as of July the 1st. So in the most simple way of how we explain that to property owners is, what was your property worth, or what could it have theoretically sold for around July the 1st? Most properties are valued on market value, but there are a handful that we value on what's called legislated or regulated values. Those are properties like our major industrial properties, which I believe there's one in Princeton, which is the mine. So all the improvements on the mining property are actually legislated values, except for the land. The land is at market value. Other examples would be farmland is another one where we use regulated values. Okay. So there's many factors that affect market value. And anyone that's sold property in the past will understand, how some of these factors impact the value of their property. I think the primary one is, where is the property located? That's, certainly will dictate how much anyone can get for the property. But there's other things that are really important that help determine value, one of which is determined by a local municipality or local government, are the bylaws or the zoning, land use controls. What kinds of characteristics does the property have? Perhaps it's a waterfront property, which is usually more valuable than non-waterfront. Maybe it's on a slope and it has a good view, or maybe it's on a slope and is difficult to build on, which can impact the value. And of course, the type of building or improvement that's located on a property will affect the value. For example, if a house would have a different value than an apartment building or a hotel. We value income-producing properties. Commercial properties are based on what they can get for rents in the marketplace, and I'll talk a little bit more about that further. Our sort of foundation for determining market value is what we call highest and best use, and those are items that help us determine value, like what's actually physically possible on the property. What could you actually build on there, given the constraints of the size, topography, location? What do the zoning bylaws allow you to build? And is it in a location where it's actually financially feasible? Like, is there a profit in it for a developer to build on the property? Is there demand for that property? And once all of these sort of first three attributes are determined, then that decides whether it's maximally productive to actually develop a piece of property and determine its highest and best use. Our communities are changing. There's sort of various attributes that local government determines in terms of sort of rezoning applications, redevelopment, what the market demand is, and all of these ultimately will help us determine what the assessments are around July the 1st. This past year has been quite an active year in the marketplace, and we've seen in many of our communities, they've not only been active in terms of sales and values of properties, but also in development and quite a bit of construction going on in many areas throughout the Okanagan and in Princeton as well. We have 9 classes of property. The largest one is residential property. That's where we have about 80% of the total folios fall into Class 1 residential. Other properties are Class 2 utilities, supportive housing, Class major industrial, which I described, your mine in Princeton would fall into class 4. And class 4 is not only including mining properties, but it would include sawmills or pulp mills, large ferry terminals. And the way the regulation is written, it's based on capacities. So for example, a sawmill that they would have to produce so many board feet of lumber to be able to fall into class 4. And if they weren't a large operation and they didn't meet the capacity within the regulation, then they would default to class 5, which is light industrial. Our next classification is class 6, and that's business and other, because if properties don't fall into any of the other classes, then they could default to class 6. Class 7 is our managed forests class. Class 8 is recreational nonprofit properties, and class 9 is for farm land. Our assessment cycle and key dates. So we've just completed our inquiry period. It's when we mail out the assessment notices to our over 2 million property owners, and they have the month of January to read over their notice and call into our office and speak directly to an appraiser if they have any questions. And we encourage them to do that, or to go and look on our public website. They can search for their own property. They can search for their neighbors' properties. If in their review of their assessment and perhaps a conversation with an appraiser, they feel that the assessment is not correct, they have the opportunity to appeal it. And that's the part of the year that we're just going into now. So it's what we call PARP, or Property Assessment Review Panel. And these are hearings. This year, because of COVID, they're all being done by telephone conference calls, and the hearings will run from actually about February 5th until March 15th this year. So we'll have all the hearings for anyone that chooses to appeal during that time frame. To launch an appeal, they do have to send a formal request in writing prior to January 31st. And then once that's been established, they would be sent a notice of hearing and given a date and a time that they would have to attend by telephone. Once we've finished all the hearings, then part of what we do is we add up all the changes on the roll for all our communities, and we send out what's called the revised roll, and that helps your community in Princeton establish their budget for taxes for later this year in the summer. So it's really important that we send those changes along. That revised roll will be sent to the local governments in early April. Once we've completed the revised roll and all our hearings, then we move into sort of looking at properties, obtaining information from various sources. We do reassessment projects. We go out and look at new construction. And the other thing is, if someone is still not satisfied with a decision from PARP, they have an opportunity to go to a second level of hearings, which is called Property Assessment Appeal Board. They would be notified in early April of their decision, and information would be available on their notification explaining how they would apply to go to the second level. There is an appeal deadline for PAB. It is April 30th, and there is a fee. It's $30 for each property that they wish to appeal. And I already described to you our July the 1st is our valuation date. And so we look at sales of properties around. So for example, in Princeton, if we're looking at single family homes in your community, we would be looking at sales both before July and after July to help us determine what houses would be worth at July the 1st. Other important dates, so in the fourth quarter, things that we really look at while we're doing what we call roll production. So we're analyzing information and pulling all the data together to help formulate the next year's assessment roll. October 31st is an important date for us. We want to know what's actually physically on a piece of property, as well as what's the zoning as at that date. Why this is important is if we have a new house being built, for example, and we received a permit from you, but we received it, say, late in September, And when the owners only started constructing the house at October 31st, let's say there's just a foundation in the ground and they haven't started actually building the rest of the house, we would only assess the land at market value as well as that foundation. So it would be what we would call a partly complete building. The next year when it's finished is when the value would increase to reflect the fully finished house. November 30th is whoever owns the property, according to the land title records, that's who would receive the assessment notice in January. And our completed roll is effective as of December 31st. We have the relationship is we do, sort of part of the equation for establishing tax notices, and of course you are instrumental at the municipal level in determining the budget and determining the tax rates that will be applied to the assessments, which will ultimately calculate everybody's property taxes. And of course, like I had mentioned earlier, the revised roll just gives you the ability to sort of review the assessment tax roll to sort of finalize some of your budgets before you determine the final mill rates for taxes. And then, of course, the tax notices go out usually in June, and folks have to pay their taxes usually in early July. I know this, like last year for 2020, there were some changes due to COVID, and some municipalities did allow people a little bit of a grace period to pay their taxes. I haven't heard, I don't know what's going to happen this year. I'm not sure. I'm sure those are conversations that you'll be having with staff as to what's going to happen this year. Impact. So when we send our notices out in January, often, values will go up. In fact, that's what happened for many single-family homes in Princeton, is they went up considerably this year. And owners, when they read their assessment notice, they just are concerned that their taxes are going to go up at the same rate that their assessments went up. So what we try and explain to them that they really need to look at, are they similar to the average increase within their property class in their neighborhood? So we'll ask them to go on to our public website, look at some of their neighbors' assessments. If they're going up more or less at the same rate, they won't likely have much of an impact on their taxes. If they're not going up as much as their neighbors, they may actually see a slight decrease. But if they're going up higher than the average, then they definitely will see an increase in taxes. The other thing that we do is in December, where we are able to calculate an assessment that's going up higher than average, like quite a bit higher than average, we'll send out an early notification letter to those owners. Just really, we want them to pay attention to their assessment, because ultimately this will impact their taxes. And it also gives them an opportunity to call into our office, and if they have any questions or they need a better understanding as to why their assessment went up more than others did. So now I want to talk a little bit about the assessment roll and what happened throughout the province as well as Princeton. So provincially, our number of folios just went up very slightly, a little over 1%, and we're at slightly over 2 million properties in total. Our value went up almost 4%, so the roll actually increased throughout the province to just slightly over $2 trillion. However, our non-market change, and that's all the changes that are mostly based on new construction, but it could also include things like zoning changes or subdivisions. Well, it decreased provincially. It went down 18.6%. I'm happy to say Princeton sort of saw everything go in an increasing direction. So your number of properties didn't really increase a whole lot, quite a bit less than 1%, and you have just slightly over 2,000 properties. But your roll did increase by 10%. Last year you had 499 million was your total roll, and it went up to 552 million this year. And your non-market change went up considerably as well. So the non-market change last year was about 4.5 million, and it went up to 7.5 million. And sort of the major reason why it increased was due to new construction. Quite a few new houses were built, as well as some Class 6 properties were increased. Generally, what we saw in the marketplace was for single-family homes. They went up anywhere, from being sort of flat, but most of them did go up in the 10 to 20% range, and a few were even as high as 25%. Strata residential also increased. Their range was a little tighter at +5 to +10%. However, commercial was sort of bucking the trend a little bit. What we had found is for residential, there was, quite a bit of demand, a lot of sales happened. Like COVID was had an interesting impact on the residential market. At first, in March, April, no one was really sure what was going to happen because the market really came to a standstill, and nothing really was selling for about a month there. And then the market came back through the summer, and it really came back strong. And so what we saw was, a number of people from various locations, and the Lower Mainland decided that they wanted to have houses. They didn't want to live in condos anymore. So I think that's where quite a few folks were coming from those urban Lower Mainland locations, and they were starting to look at communities like Princeton were being quite attractive to them this past year. However, for commercial industrial, that wasn't the same story. What we found is many businesses were impacted in a negative way due to COVID, and primarily in the commercial sector, especially the smaller retail businesses that were owner-operated businesses, small restaurants, some small retail stores. The grocery stores did fine. Our larger big box, they did fine because, of course, we were all still going to the grocery store and buying food and supplies. Industrial warehousing did quite well as well. So there seemed to be a fairly strong demand for light industrial warehouses type of businesses. And that may also have been slightly impacted due to COVID, just more people purchasing things online. And so, those kinds of businesses tended to flourish. The one area that we probably saw the greatest impact on the commercial side was for the tourism sector. So hotels, motels were, very, very hard hit in terms of COVID and being able to actually operate at a profit. So those properties, hotels did decrease this past year. I'm going to talk a little bit about the appeal process now. I did describe it to you. January was the inquiry period. February, we're just in the middle of doing our hearings now. And then the second level of appeal I mentioned was the Property Assessment Appeal Board, which anyone who goes to PARP, you can't just jump into PAB without going to PARP. So for those that go to the first level of hearings, if they're still not satisfied, they can go ahead and make application before the end of April to go to the second level. And I did just look up just to see sort of how many appeals or properties are being appealed this year for the Princeton panel, and it's very low this year. We've got a total of 6 appeals, and they're mostly residential. So it's pretty light. So even considering the market went up and most people's assessments went up for their homes, most people seem to be satisfied. They're okay with it. So information sharing, I kind of touched on that a little bit. COVID again prompted us to be a bit innovative this past year, where normally we would sort of email, or you would send us things like your building permits through email. We created a standard sort of permit program, which is called Citrix ShareFile, and we're encouraging our local government to send us information through ShareFile, things things still, like our building permits, which we really rely on. We need to know these buildings that are being constructed so that we can add them to the assessment roll, and you'll be able to collect taxes on the improvements. Building plans, we like you to share that information with us, any zoning changes, development applications, if there's any extensions in terms of service infrastructure, permissive and revitalization, tax exemptions, they have to be sent to us before October 31st every year. And if the municipality does own any property and you actually lease it to a taxable occupier, we need to know about that, because they're actually, the occupiers are liable for taxes as well. Any mailing address changes, that sort of thing. We provide you with ownership changes, so as the sales come through, we will send the local government all the changes in terms of owner changes, so you can update your records and be able to send the tax notice out to the correct person. Other resources, we have this top-notch assessment search tool on our public website. I encourage everybody to go here. You can look up every property around the province. It's very simple and user-friendly. You just type in an address. Once you've typed that in, the folio will pop up, and if you go to the map that sort of describes the property, you can click on all your neighbors' properties, and their assessments will subsequently come up, and that information is easily available as well. There's lots of other information on our public website in terms of market trends. There's other mapping that show assessment valuations throughout the province. There's frequently asked questions, data advice, which is really important to local government. That's sent either on a weekly or monthly basis, depending on what the local government has requested. Other Assessment Link BC, which is also available to local government. Those are reports that are available that local government can download and kind of slice and dice the information on the assessment roll for your own purposes. Yeah, so that brings me to the end of everything that I was hoping to share with you, and I would be happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Did we have any questions?
No, I don't. No.
Okay. It was a good presentation. Thank you very much. I do have a question. Empty land. So if you had a large tract of land that was sitting vacant and properties around it were selling, does that drive the price of that land value up?
It could potentially increase the assessment, because we would be looking at the sales surrounding every piece of property in that neighborhood. So if the sales are indicating that the assessments are going up, then more than likely the assessment on that piece of property would go up as well. Other examples of that is where you have a commercial building, and if the tenant moves out or the owner moves out and the building sits empty for a year, sometimes longer, we still assess the building, whether it's occupied or not, at full market value.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. I guess there's no other questions, so I want to thank you again for your presentation, and thank you for coming tonight.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And if you think of anything after the fact, I'm always available. You know, James knows how to find me easily, so I always am more than happy to answer any questions. So I am going to sign off now and enjoy the rest of your meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Okay, so our next presentation is from Jim Zaffino, Manager of Finance from the Regional District, and he's here to give us a update on the Regional District budget. Jim?
Thank you, Mayor, Council, staff. Thank you for allowing us to give you the presentation for the Regional District 2021 budget, which has had first reading, and also the hospital budget, which has first and second reading. And I'd like to introduce to you John Cote, who will make the presentation for the hospital. John?
Good evening, Your Worship.
facility constructions and renovations. Typically, the Regional Hospital District funds 40% of interior health's capital budget for the region. And currently, the 2021 budget sits at second reading, and the provisional budget as it currently sits is $15,228,286. This slide just summarizes some of the major projects that have gone on in this region. The one that probably most know of is the Penticton Patient Care Tower project. Currently, phase 1 of that project was completed in the spring of 2019, and that ambulatory care tower was opened in April of 2019. In regards to phase 1, they're still cleaning up some existing items that are deficient in regards to the construction of that tower, but I think they're getting close to being done on that. Phase 2 is currently underway and focused on the renovation of the existing parts of the Penticton Regional Hospital, including the emergency ward, pharmacy, and material stores. I believe a year or two ago they opened the emergency ward. That part of that phase is done. But the expected completion of the entire phase 2 is sometime in 2022. Other capital and equipment improvement projects budgeted in 2021 are currently set at $2.987 million at second reading. This slide just gives sort of a summary of the 2021 budget as it currently sits at second reading compared to the prior 2 fiscal periods. I'll just highlight a couple of items. Let's start at the top with the tax requisition. Currently, the tax requisition is sitting at the same level as it was in the prior 2 periods of 2020 and 2019. The other item that I would like to highlight in the expenditure side is the capital grants of $8.662 million. That line item is made up of 3 items. Of that total, $426,000 is for minor equipment projects that are less than $100,000. The current year health request greater than $100,000 at $2.56 million. And also in that total are carry forward capital grants that in prior budgets, and that sits at $5.675 million. At the bottom of the slide, it just highlights the estimated mill rate currently. It hasn't really changed much from the prior year. The average residential property tax for the region, based on an average assessment, went up about 50 cents to about 112.21. Jim had calculated what the average residential property tax would be in Princeton, and it went up from $55 in 2020 to just over $61 for 2021. Based on, I guess, the average residential property value in Princeton was $242,000. This slide just breaks down where the tax requisition pool is coming from, which member municipality or rural area. As what was previously discussed in regards to assessments, Princeton's overall went up a wee bit, so the total pool that's coming out of Princeton went up just under $8,000. Just to reiterate, though, the property tax rates are pretty much the same throughout the entire region. So if you live in Penticton or Princeton, the property taxes that you pay on your residence is the same rate. It just depends on what your property is valued at is to determine how much you would pay. This slide just summarizes the current long-term debt that's held by the Regional Hospital District. I'll note regards to the Penticton Tower Care Project. We received a debt issue in the spring of 2020. That debt issue is for 25 years. This slide just summarizes the current reserves held by the regional district and projects out over 5 years. I will highlight under the 2021 column the reductions of 8.6 million. Of that, 5.6 is in regards to those carried forward capital requests from prior years that haven't been claimed by Interior Health as the projects are still ongoing. This slide just again summarizes the capital request from IHA, the progress payments in regards to the Penticton Regional Hospital Tower Project, and the debt servicing costs related to it. I will highlight a couple of items. The 2021 capital request over 100,000 of 3.961 million by IHA. The board at its meeting in January had rejected one item on the list that was requested by Interior Health, so that amount as it sits on the budget has been reduced by 1.4 million. The other item I'd like to highlight is just the annual debt servicing costs in regards to the Penticton Regional Hospital Care Tower Project. The annual debt servicing costs are just under $3.5 million. This slide, it just sort of calculated a couple 5-year average in regards to the Interior Health capital requests that we receive annually. I calculated for a period from 2016 to 2020 and also for 2017, 2021 just as a comparative. And as you can see that that average has gone up over 500,000. Just as well, I'd like to point out the 5-year average for the period, the 5-year period that was 2015 to 2019 was about $2.1 million. In 2 years, it's gone up. That average has gone up just over $1 million. And that concludes my presentation. And I'd like to thank you for having me, and I can stand by for any questions anyone may have.
Anybody have any questions?
Would you have access to what amount of money came in from sponsorships, donations, and that sort of thing? Is that something you would be aware of? In other words, towards the hospital, the Penticton Hospital?
Did you hear that?
I didn't quite catch that. I'm sorry.
He was asking if
We knew if we had the numbers for the sponsorships and donations that the Penticton Regional Hospital got for the tower. Do we have those?
No, that would be that would either be through Interior Health or through the Medical Foundation at Penticton Regional Hospital. They would have those figures. I know there's been quite a lot of donations in regards to money and I know the Campy Foundation, had given quite a bit. I think they donated money in regards to an MRI machine as well. But they don't share those figures with us.
That's fine. Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? Okay.
Hey, thank you. I guess on the gym.
Like you heard you.
Jim gonna do this?
Oh, so no more questions? Okay.
Oh,
well,
That's it.
no more questions.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. While I bring up my presentation, I'll just talk a little bit about who I am. I started working for the regional district this time around on September 28th. I was here 14 years ago. second CAO for 8 years. So I have a good background on budgets and municipalities and also regional districts. So with that, I'd like to present my presentation. Okay, so my presentation, I'll try to keep it short, but I need relevant information just to that you and council know about it. So with that, I'll just enlarge the screen. So this budget has had first reading from the board. There will be a second and third in early March. There's going to be some changes, however, they won't be affecting municipalities. The board determined how they want to use the limited COVID funds that the regional district did get amongst the electoral areas. So just a little bit about budget structure and what regional districts are. Municipal governments usually have 3 to 5 budgets, general, water, sewer, some may have electric or storm. A regional district, every service must have its own budget and is taxed based on that. For 2021, we have 155 services, so we have 155 budgets. Each budget is self-sustaining, that is, we cannot transfer funds from one to another other than for administrative overhead. We'll talk about that shortly. So budget process, it started in October this year, only because I started in late September. The first budget workshop started November 22nd, 30th, November 13th. Staff took information that the board directed us and amended the budget accordingly. By law, regional districts have until March 31st to adopt the budget. The regional districts, as stated, have services. However, each service, the different classes of the services, the first one, the biggest one is regional services, and that's where more municipalities would actually benefit from these services and are billed for some or not or all of the services. So this slide shows a portion of it, and this one shows the rest of it. As you can see, there's quite a few here. You don't pay for all of these, but you do pay for a number of them, and I'll show later in the slides. The other type of service is rural, and the rural is where the electoral areas use more than anyone else. They are not municipalities where they can afford to have their own building inspection department, bylaw, etc. So economies of scale actually benefits the electoral areas to have them go through the regional district, whereas you would have your own building inspection, bylaw, etc., and you would tax your people through your tax system. And finally, the other types of services are shared services and local services. A good example of shared services would be a fire department, where Permissive is a good example, where they share the protection services for area B, G, and Permissive. And local services, again, a fire department is a good example, where area A and Anacus Mountain only services their electoral area, so they don't bill anyone else. We just bill people in electoral area A. The budget process, as I stated, it's started late. However, we are, I believe, on time now, and it's going to pass well within March 31st deadline. The process went for first reading on January 21st. The draft budget is in public consultation as we speak. You're actually the last municipality that will be making a presentation. The electoral areas have had pre-recording for all of them. We've seen with COVID, we can't have live meetings, unfortunately. However, we are going to have invitations for open town hall meetings, so I will be available to answer any questions or concerns that taxpayer may have. So factors affecting the 2021 requisition of yours. So town of Princeton comprised 2.78% of total assessments for the regional district, up as the lady just talked regarding your growth, she originally stated it was 10%, but when they use converted values, your assessment went up 6.41%, and that includes a non-market change of 1.71%. That's phenomenal for a city. I've never seen one that high in the times that we had like this. Average for the regional district was 1.7. So unfortunately, Princeton will have to bear a little bit more of the burden because it's going materially higher than the average.
It's not a lot.
So what's the major newest change is the administration overhead. When I first started, I was asked to review the overhead as the board was not satisfied with the formula that was used in 2020. And one of the good examples is to show that SIR, Sterile Insect Relief Program, was charged $70,000 plus for administrative fee. The year before it was just over $11,000, and using the new formula, just over 17. And what's changed in the administrative charge now is that 20% of total administration overhead is now charged against capital, where there was no capital, no administration charge to capital at all up until this year. So that actually benefits the municipalities at the expense of electoral areas, because it's the areas that have the capital projects. And the board realizing that, they've actually accepted that. So that's something where the municipalities do get. Every year, the board has to relook at the grants, at service level changes, and accept the capital. So the following are, and also this is just what I just stated about the three changes. So this is the grant and aid requests for 2021. As you can see, authorized is 25,000, request is almost 64. Last year, the authorized was 40,000. So at the first and second meeting, the board deliberated, and this is what they came up with. These are the service level requests. So service level request is where the service is, the staff's asking for an increase in the service level because of demand or in specific circumstances. In this case, 0.65. And as you can see, it actually identifies and itemizes where the charges will go for 2021. It's also required, it's on the screen, that it shows the 2022 and beyond for budget purposes. The program change supplemental request for 1 FTE for technical project manager, and this is where the projected costs are for 2021, and as I stated, falls through for 5 years. This is something that was greatly debated in the mosquito control program. I don't believe Princeton is in it. The board authorized an FTE partial increase for 18,484 at second reading. This budget will change because the board requested 43,000 in reserves used for 1 year to offset the tax increases for those areas that are materially hit. Last two FTE requests are specific to the Similkameen Recreation and the Elder Landfill, and they are 25,000, 17,000. So what I thought that you'd be interested in is looking at the capital projects that you have paid for through previous taxes, because these capital projects were funded through reserves, which were taxed for the regional district taxpayers. So they're either funded from taxes or grants, but not from taxation itself. If you have any questions on these, I could be able to see if we can help. Otherwise, I'll ask the staff to give an answer. This is the budget as a summary of the budget for 2020-2021. You'll see a change in 2020 in that in the RDOS expenses part of the budget, up until this year, they've included operating and capital. What that does is it doesn't allow anyone to really compare operational budgets from year to year, especially if you have major capital projects thrown into each of the services. What I've done here is I split them up between operating at 37.8. Debt servicing is essentially, it's not taxable, but what it is just in order to show people in the electoral areas and 9.2 million is all funded from either reserves or grants, and that's going to happen barring future pandemic issues. Capital projects contingent on grants is exactly that. It's not going to go forward until we get approval in writing that we receive the grants that we applied for. This year, I'll be asking for the board's permission to actually have two separate capital and operating budgets as you as a municipality have. Right now, you don't mix your capital and operating on one page. We do. It's 155 will probably, I'm just estimating now, will probably be up to 210, 220. Where the 155 will still stay operating, and the additional capital projects will be separate. We'll also introduce this year a 5-year capital project plan where staff will be writing down what is required for capital projects for the next 5 years, how it's funded, and the report will also show where we're at for eligibility for reserves. This is a slide that shows the tax requisition increases. So there's some variances. I believe it's just over $6,400 that to your taxes have increased, and it states why. So 911 emergency system tax increase of $23,000 for Princeton, showing where that comes from. So 2,500 is for fire dispatch, which we have no control. Court contract 13,000, no control, and the service fee. That's for that one. Regional government increased by 1,849, and while I earlier stated that governments or the electoral areas got the impact on administration fee, this is one area where it actually hit everybody for regional government, so it's the new formula for administration. And regional trails for Princeton increased 1,454. As of this reading, it is a 15.02% increase from the previous year, and I've shown here where the different increases are. Under the amortization and vehicle insurance, what we're seeing here is that the amortization essentially is a depreciation for reserves and is greatly understated, and staff reviewed that and increased it for this year. This is your tax requisition, and as I stated, I talked about the increases of 2,300 for the 911, 1,800 for general government, and the regional trails, it also went up 1,400. So it shows 6.36% as it stands right now. But as I stated earlier, you did have growth, non-market growth at 1.71%. So technically, you're just over 4% for the increase if you take into account the non-market growth. This is the requisition for all the regional districts, and as you can see, it's 20,674,000, and as I stated earlier, yours is increased by $6,225. This is just a simple pie. It's something that the board has seen for a number of years, so I just kept it. It shows Penticton has got the biggest pie, and electoral area D has the second, and E the third. And that's all I've got. Just if you have any questions, I'll be pleased to answer.
Thanks, Jim. Does anybody have any questions of Jim? It's a lot to take in. It's a long process, the regional district budgeting. Doesn't appear anybody has any questions, Jim. I want to thank you for presenting tonight, and thanks for taking your time out and coming out here.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate this, and if any one of you have any questions, please feel free to either email me or phone. I'm available anytime. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
There's no unfinished business, no staff reports, council reports. Councilor Willis.
I don't have any meetings to report right now, Mr. Mayor.
Nothing. Okay. Councilor Gould.
I have no meetings to report, just have been very much involved in rereading the budget and the questions, preparing for this meeting.
Okay. Councilman.
I can't remember if I reported how close we were to the season being canceled, but it's officially canceled. We're looking forward to next September, hopefully that the worldwide situation, in particular in our area, improves so that we can get back to a normal state of affairs. I guess one thing I did wonder about was I wanted to comment that I thought the roads had been taken care of as good as possible, in terms of the fact that it just seems like it's a never-ending 2 inches here and 2 inches there and all that sort of thing. That being said, I would question the mayor whether it would be possible to have a council meet with our two maintenance staff, Jared and Jim, for a couple of reasons. As council members, we get a lot of input in terms of, and questions about how things are done and how they go about it, and what, types of equipment we have, what our capacities are, and that sort of thing. I think it would be worthwhile to be able to sit down and ask a lot of questions and get a lot of information in terms of when people are approaching us with comments or whatever, we're able to answer them with some sort of information, if that was possible.
Yeah, we
And
can,
that's-
I think we can arrange something, CAO. Okay, yep,
And that was everything.
okay. I've had a few meetings. Just some of note, I met with the South Okanagan Similkameen Primary Care Network Rural Growth Plan group on last Tuesday, I believe it was. We just discussed where they're at with the primary care network in the area. I think it's going to be, they're planning on rolling it out over the course of this year. Oh, sorry. Councillor Elliott, do you have a report?
Yeah, actually.
I'll let you jump in.
I also, South Okanagan, I can't, there we go. I also attended the South Okanagan Similkameen Primary Care Network Rural Growth Plan discussion on Zoom, as you did. And a meeting that was scheduled for this afternoon got canceled for a time conflict. But I wanted to actually give a pat on the back and a thank you to Director of Finance James Graham and the front office staff and town staff for the way they've been responding to all the queries related to the consultation period about the budget that we're dealing with. I know that there's been a lot of activity online, a lot of speculation as to why things are being done the way they are, and comparing this year to last year when it comes to the process is not fair when you consider that we're dealing with COVID protocols that are not Princeton protocols, they're provincial protocols. And I think, when you consider all the concessions that have been made by the Director of Finance and town staff, I think there's probably been more accessibility than there has been in the past. And I hope that some of the lessons that we learned through this can be used in future years as well. And I think that'll help everybody in the long run. And that's all I have to report.
Perfect, thank you, Councillor Elliott. So I guess he finished up mine. I was supposed to attend a meeting on Friday, and I'm going to ask the CAO if he can speak briefly to it. There was a stakeholders meeting with AIM, and I couldn't make it, but I believe you were in on that conversation. And I just want to say that AIM has done a better job on keeping the roads clean, and I want to thank them for that. And if you give it just a real brief.
Yeah, so it was a stakeholders meeting. AIM was not in attendance, nor was the Ministry of Transportation. It was just stakeholders. There's a follow-up meeting, I believe, with AIM this coming Friday.
Okay.
But the general consensus, I think, around the table was that there was an improvement in service.
Perfect.
Still a few little things to work on, but I think everyone was mutually impressed.
Great, thank you. Okay, we'll move on. Correspondence action requested, 9.1. We have a Princeton Leaders for Literacy request for council approve and support a Little Free Library to be located in the downtown core, constructed and the installation. So we do have a recommendation from staff that council approve the placement of a Little Free Library in the downtown core in principle, and that staff work with Princeton Leaders for Literacy, and that a proposed concept and location be brought before council for approval.
Make that motion.
Councilor Gould, seconder.
I
Councilor
would do
Willis.
that, Mr. Mayor.
Pardon me?
He'll second.
Oh, okay, thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay, all in favor? Thank you. Bylaws and resolutions, 10.1. The 2021 financial bylaw. We have a recommendation that council give the town of Princeton 5-year financial plan bylaw 2021 to 2025, number 995, 2020, third reading as presented.
Make that motion, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Willis, seconder. Councilor Gould. Questions or comments? Yeah?
Yes,
Okay.
but I'll probably go last, if that's okay.
Does anybody else have questions or comments? Okay, it's all yours.
I'm the only one that has one.
Go ahead, Barb.
Well, I kind of figured that by the time everybody answered all these other things, that it'd be like 4 things that I'd have. So in regards to, we all know that there was a different way of doing it this year because of COVID. And I think that being said, I think that what was presented gave all the information that was needed, ample opportunity to have discussions. Sure, there was little glitches in the media, but it was one of those things, if we needed to get it perfect, it would have had to been redone from start to finish, which took long enough that I don't think it needed to be redone on the part of the finance. But with it, of course, there's lots of questions, and I have to look at it in the sense of, how do I feel about this budget? Am I comfortable with the budget? There's lots of, as we just saw with the 2 presentations from the hospital and the regional hospital and the regional district, there's a lot of things that come into consideration when we do the budget. That wasn't something that the public was able to see this year. So there's a lot of information that goes into it. So I think that if really there was 5 major concerns, I think, that were submitted by residents, and I'm very thankful to those residents. Everybody that participated and asked a question, phoned in, got their question answered right away. I think that's good. You're part of the process. But the 5% tax increase during a pandemic, that was like #1 concern. But again, that's easily explained. It's not a 5% increase on last year's taxes. It's a base increase based on what we collect from the BC Assessment Authority, and 5% of the value there, not 5% to an individual person's taxes. So if anybody still has questions on that, please call James, come to the town office, ask about that. You'll be reassured what your values are actually, what the changes are going to be. The other contentious issue is lack of funds going to repairing our infrastructure. Well, that's a bigger project that we can deal with on what we generate with our taxable income. We can't fix the infrastructure with just our tax revenue in a year or 5 years. That's a bigger picture that I believe we're all working on, that we're continuing to apply for grants, that we're looking at other options of moving forward. So it's not that we're ignoring it or not wanting to do it, it's just, it's too big to do within our taxation. We couldn't afford the tax increase if we wanted to fix it all. And then some concerns about too much being spent on tourism and beautification. And that, I think, yes, it's pandemic time. No, we aren't encouraging people to come and visit us, but personally speaking, I think it's been a nice little treat for us. Some going into town and seeing something different. Whereas the joke always used to be it's like a vortex and same person sitting on the same bench in front of the post office. Come back to town 10 years later, same person. So in my opinion, I think it's been a good thing for the community. I think it's a positive thing for the community. And again, if there's still strong objections to what we are planning to do, and I believe the plan includes only if we get the grant funding. There was a few little things within the budget that we're going to continue with, but just to finish up what was already agreed on last year. The other complaints about sound quality of our meetings, I witnessed 2 different people do sound checks tonight to make sure, so it's technology, it's not perfect, but it's available. We're at least doing it public, we're being as open as we possibly can be. And I think that the idea from the finance and CAO Thomas to do the public budget presentation online was a good one for safety reasons, for economic reasons as well, and I think James has explained that. Like the cost to do that mail out is pretty high, and going forward, it's available. Come into the town office and pick up a copy, or maybe even phone in and ask if you can't get in, ask if we can mail you one. I think we could probably arrange for that. The next thing was about airport lighting, and that's one thing that I'd probably have to get somebody else to speak more on, because it was about the costs versus what we're going to get from it, right? Like what's the take back on that? And I can't speak to that, but I do know that there were very valid reasons given to us to why we should consider that. And part of it was we were looking at budget or grant funding as well, but there is money in the reserves to do it. So we don't have to wait for grant funding. The other part in some of the questions was about our process for getting quotes on contracts, and maybe CAO Thomas can speak on that, like in regards to the 2 roofs and equipment. And I know when it comes to budget time where we're setting budgets, we're not picking contractors. We're getting an estimated ballpark of what it's going to cost. So it's not, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not saying that that's how much it's going to cost, but that's the estimate given.
Right. Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. We did go out and get some estimates on what it would cost just to prepare the budget. And if the budget is approved and the project approved, then we will put it out for tender and tender it out.
So that process has not changed at all.
That's right.
And again, I'm confident that we can assure people that have the concerns that there is, we did look into it, we have the answers, and we're not hiding anything. So I just wanted to make it, everything's here, everything's in the 300 some pages, but not everybody's going to read it. So that's where I like to just make it verbal.
Yeah, two points I'll point out. Number one, yeah, the capital plan gives maximum allocations for capital projects. It doesn't mean we'll spend the entire amount of the capital project. So we always go through a competitive bid process or a purchasing policy, which is available online. It's been, it's readily available for anyone who wants to read it. And then the second thing I'll point out is sometimes there are ancillary works. So, we build a structure, there may be roads that have to be reconstructed. There may be a sidewalk that has to be repaved. There may be, in the course of paving, we decide to do water and sewer works underneath the road. Those have to be taken into consideration. Sometimes it's not just, here's how much we're going to pay a contractor to do the work. It may be some public works wages that may be included in that, or some other ancillary costs as well, so.
And if I could just circle back to the airport question, that actually is a grant-funded project that is 80% funded through grants. And our focus when we applied for the grant was emergency services, air ambulance. They flagged that as something that would be very helpful for them. We went after a grant and we were successful in that grant.
Thank you.
And it's important to note that we've already received the grant for the project.
Excellent.
We received it in November 2020. That's why it's in reserves for 2021.
Yeah.
Okay. And if I can just continue.
go ahead.
Like, stop me if you want. The other things, like the infrastructure, the tax, we've talked about that, and I think we've talked about it enough. Like, the biggest thing for the tax increase is when, and James, I think you have it in this time, the mill rates. And that, to me, is the biggest picture, to show somebody how to understand that the revenue that the town collects that is based on per thousand value of your property. So if your value has increased since 2017, then you would think you would pay more taxes, right? Your value of your property is going up, but the mill rate's actually gone down. So you're still, taxes are going up, but your value's gone up, like a lot. So if, for the expectation that you wouldn't have any tax increase is, I think, again, please call the office, it can be explained to you. The infrastructure, or I believe it was $900,000 was what Jamie Umpoblee gave as an estimate for one block to fix our infrastructure. So again, that's a lot. That's more than a 5% increase was 130,000?
Or 5% increase of 130.
130,000. So that's, we can't afford to increase our taxes to even fix one block at a time. It's a bigger picture than that. It's going to take more time. The downtown revitalization, I think that's a great idea. It's a small amount of money coming from the municipal taxes, but it's encouraging our businesses to take pride in what they own, and perhaps even make it more accessible for the community. So, because it also would cover wheelchair accessibility. Sound quality in the meetings we've talked about. The downtown revitalization, they talked about the bronze statues. I'm not going to dispute that. There's only so many people that are capable to do it. And the idea that was given to us by Gary was amazing, and I think it's all coming together. The visitor center wood, the arches, everything, that was actually BC. So that was a BC company that did that, as well as Gary also engaged with some local contractors to do subsidiary work. Almost done. Dust control on Harold Avenue. That one is a great request, but a perfect example of where it should just stay at the front. That is not necessarily for budget considerations, because I believe if we're letting our managers manage their departments, that's just a request that needs to go there for them to fit it within their budget. So if we could just ensure that that gets deferred.
That actually has already been forwarded on to our public works superintendent.
Perfect.
He's put it in the plan.
And that is great. That's a perfect example of, it's one of those things, if we don't know what we don't know, we don't know. So people ask anytime. Please don't just not ask because budget's done. Tax due date, that was something that happened last year, and it will stay at July 2nd due date this year. I believe the policy or the bylaw on that has been amended from last year.
Well, we passed the tax rates bylaw, which has our tax due dates in every year, as required by the community charter. We're starting to follow a little bit more of the general tax collection policy from the community charter of the provincial government. And it harmonizes our tax collection policy with the regional district. Those were the two primary reasons.
Right. And it only gives 1% penalty if you can't pay, then 9% if you can't pay by September.
That was our policy. That was our tax rate bylaw
Right.
from last year. So.
Okay. So going forward, I think that's still fair. It's matching what comes in, what goes out, because we can't, if we don't collect our revenues, we can't pay our bills. So I agree with that. Neighborhood parks and other requests we get all the time for other recreational services. That part comes under our OCP, does it not, Carrie? Like when we're re-looking at the official community plan, we're going to be looking at what areas are designated for parks and upgrades, and so.
That is correct. We have actually quite a bit of land that is undevelopable right now, that is zoned residential, that will be recommending be moved into parkland.
Parkland, okay. So that is something, again, that can't be just done 1 year. It needs, and I've spoken with the mayor on this, I've spoken with Lyle, CAO on this, just, we need to develop a bigger picture, right? If you're gonna start, don't just piecemeal things. We do need to look at it, and it's gonna cost money to do that. So we need to maybe next year put it in the budget to start allocating for some plans for that. And again, it hinges on
Well, it does. And
success of our aquatic center application.
yeah, a lot of our stuff right now is hinging upon that aquatic center. But we're doing our OCP review right now, or this year, and that'll take, what, a year, probably a good solid year. We do have a parks, recreation plan, but it's getting older. So after the OCP was done, I've asked staff to look at that because once we have all the zoning figured out, well, that's when you look at what else are we gonna do? But you don't put the cart before the horse and go and, well, let's go develop this, and then, well, we actually need that for something else, kind of like other things that have happened in the past.
So it again, just reiterating, we've discussed it, it's on the radar, it's not something that's individual. We're not looking at swing sets this year.
No.
So, but if there was something, and if it's small and it fit within the existing budget, we could go on it. The Brown Bridge replacement, is that 10 million? Was the estimate last given a few years ago?
I'm not sure what,
One of the numbers that was thrown out was upwards of 15.
Yeah, and
But
it
we don't
changes,
know.
it just keeps going.
And again, we've talked to Ministry of Transportation, we've talked to Ministry of Transportation, we've tried to talk to Ministry of Transportation, and now we're looking at alternative plans to try to find other funding for it, because we do want to maintain it. But
Yeah.
right now, there's no ministry that will discuss the bridge with us at this point. I think you were at the last go around with Ministry of Transportation when we went in. We had a half an hour meeting. We sat down and we asked about the Brown Bridge, and they said no. And we started asking about the weather. Because that was the end of our half an hour meeting. So
Because the onus would be on us completely at this time. And again, we can't afford that. At this time, can't afford to put $10 million into our budget. Then the one, Merton McLaren, the weeds in the boulevard, we've talked about that. We've talked about that we shouldn't be gardening with a weed whacker.
Right.
Like, we shouldn't be maintaining it. And again, there was talk about and discussion with putting together a streetscape. So that would be where you put the money towards that first, for that plan. And do we know where we're at that, maybe, Gary?
yeah.
That's part of that grant. Okay,
It's part of the budget to have that study done.
the study. Thank you, yeah.
And we have had discussions with the Public Works Superintendent, and our staff are very conscientious, and they too monitor Facebook and the chatter and whatever, and
Yeah.
they respond as well. So they're proud of the work that they do, and that particular item, we discussed it with the superintendent, and that's on his radar to do a better job.
Yeah, that's good. And that's the thing, like, all our staff take pride in their job. Everybody is trying to do the best, and with the community in mind, like, the best with what,
we don't have a huge public works staff. And they try to get everything done in a day, but there's not enough hours for everything to get done. And I think we need to, understand that as the public, and, when they are doing a good job, say thank you, and that's the way it is. I mean, they try, but when we get a week of rain, it's hard to get on the weeds when there's, a foot of grass to go cut too. So,
my last comment would be then towards a recommendation for Public Works is, Councillor McLean asked for perhaps a meeting with Public Works, the new heads of Public Works and Council, and going forward too, involving the people that operate the equipment in the process of what kind of equipment we purchase, right? And I believe that's something that
I will defend Public Works on that. I mean, the managers do discuss,
Yeah.
they ask their staff what they need for equipment and tools, and they come back, and that's why, there was, in the list this year, there's, a valve exerciser and other things, right?
Yeah.
It's because those are the tools and that they need, so those are what's on their wish list. The town's always done a good job at asking their Public Works guys, what do you need? And, Jim would have went and said, hey, guys, what do we need? And then he would have given that to Jamie, and then Jamie would have passed that on to us.
Right.
So,
Point being, don't ask me.
yeah.
Like, the department should be discussing it. Like, we'll set the budgets and then let the departments take care of that. So I think that answered all my questions. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Next one, 10.2, Town of Princeton Subdivision and Development Servicing Bylaw Number 996, 2021. Recommendation of the Town of Princeton Subdivision and Development Servicing Bylaw Number 996, 2021 be given first and second reading.
I'll make that motion.
Councilor Gould, seconder. Councilor McLean? Are you seconding?
Yes.
Okay.
And question,
Okay.
is it possible to have the clerk, whatever you're called now? Read out the changes to the,
Goodness, I can. I didn't attach the old bylaw because it's over 200 pages. One of the things I asked our consultant, True Consulting, was what were some of the changes they did? And what they told me was they took out some of the regulated standards that we had in the bylaw because they change all the time. The provincial standards change, the pipe size change. As we grow, things change. And to have specific things in the bylaw just ties our hands, and then every time there is a change, you have to do an amendment. So he explained to me that that is the biggest change to this bylaw. It is more, our old bylaw is more geared towards a larger center like Surrey or Langley or Delta. This new bylaw is more geared towards a smaller community and is quite similar. The examples he gave me was Oliver, Osoyoos, and Karamias. So if we have a local developer that's worked or is working in those communities and comes here, our bylaw will be similar to those communities as well. So it's a refresh. The old one's from 1994. It's updated, and there's some things that have been removed that weren't necessary to have in the bylaw.
And a few things added, right? You said like water meters.
Water meters are included in there because it's a requirement for any
Lost
new
George.
development, whether it's commercial or residential, have a water meter.
so,
Yeah, go.
reason I'm after this is that we're in a housing crisis. Like, the changes that I'm hoping are included in this is
To simplify.
going to make your job, the building inspector, the developers, the builders' job easier for everyone.
Most
Trying
definitely.
to facilitate getting by these requirements and everything else as quickly and easily as possible. There's as you can see, when you put that in front of me, as you said, 200 pages of stuff, it's fine, but what you're hoping for is that when someone wants to come along and build a carriage house or build a house or build a development or whatever, that we're doing everything we can to try and facilitate speeding that process up and making it as easy to follow as possible.
Most definitely, we're not all engineers or civic engineers, and I find the new bylaw easier to read. I know that Jared had gone through it, CAO Thomas has gone through it, and myself, and I find it much easier, and it's an easier read, it's more understandable. And when you have a large development, you're gonna have an engineer as part of your staff, and they're gonna know what standards are required during that time of the development. So, yeah, it will simplify things for sure.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, all in favor? Carried, thank you. Number 10.3, the Town of Princeton Volunteer Fire Department Bylaw Number 997, 2021. Recommendation that council give the Town of Princeton Volunteer Fire Department Bylaw Number 997, 2021 3 readings.
Need that motion, Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Councilor Willis. Seconder?
I'll second.
Counselor Gould, questions? No questions? Call the question, all in favor?
Just gonna make him talk.
Carried. Nothing else, recommendation to close the meeting.
I'll make that motion,
Or
Mr. Mayor.
adjourn, I guess. Counselor Gould, second Counselor McLean. All in favor? Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.